Today, I'd like to show you how to make Italian bread. This is a very versatile, dependable recipe, and it's come to be one of my favorites if you have to produce delicious food quickly. That's usually on my list. I found this years ago in the Southern Living magazine. It's a winner. We start by putting yeast, water, and sugar together to proof the yeast. This is an important part of making. The texture of this bread is important. It affects the temperature if you've done the proofing first, so it's well worth it. For this recipe, I have it written in how the ingredients for one loaf so that you can easily multiply out the ingredients you need in exact amounts. We start with, for one loaf, 1 cup of warm water, 1 tablespoon of sugar, and 1 tablespoon of yeast. I'm going to make a triple batch today. So here we have 3 tablespoons of sugar and 3 tablespoons of yeast. I like to think in terms of how many you want to make. This mixer will hold 4 batches, but we're just making 3 today because I'm getting ready for a Sunday dinner. This will sit for 5 minutes. You can see that we have an active yeast culture here, that it's bubbling up and very healthy. I think that's why it's called proofing. You have proved this is good yeast. After 5 minutes, if you saw no action at all, it would be time to get new yeast. So I love this step, and for some reason it really does add to the texture of the bread. So after it's been proofed, give it a stir just to make sure the sugar is incorporated everywhere. You pour it right in your mixer bowl, and then you add 2.5 cups of flour per loaf. I'm starting with 5 cups for my 3-loaf version. So we have 5 cups of flour in the mixer before we start it. We're also adding 3 tablespoons of oil. It can be whatever you cook with. I'm using olive oil. And 3 teaspoons of salt. Remember that 3 teaspoons equals a tablespoon. That's why I like to make a triple batch, because it evens out the tablespoon. Then we just begin mixing. You can see that it's starting to pull away from the machine. That's telling me that we've got almost enough flour. I've now added 6.5 cups. We'll see about the whether we get another cup in or not. Here's a 1/2 cup, and I'll stop as soon as it pulls away completely from the sides of the bowl. completely cleaned the side of the bowl, and now I'm going to knead it in the mixer for about 3 more minutes. So the important thing to remember is when you're adding the flour, don't depend on the measure as much as you do what the dough looks like. So on another day, the recipe says 2.5 cups of flour per loaf. Other days, I would need the full 7.5 cups of flour for my three loaf batch. And it's critical that you be slightly under floured than over floured, because it can affect so much of what you do after you're shaping the bread. One of my favorite parts about this recipe is you don't use pans. Instead, we will be shaping the loaves into Italian loaves and putting them on parchment paper. Let me explain how, if you have time, I'll explain how I cut the parchment paper. I buy it by the case, and it comes in a double wide piece. I've already cut this in half, but it comes in a piece this size, and I cut them. This is to be in a full-size sheet pan. Most cookie sheets are half pan size, but we need a smaller size than that. Oh, and this is the quarter pan size if you're using a little quarter sheet. And let me show you how simple it is to cut this. I just take a larger knife than what I'm cutting and put the cut ends together, aim my knife toward the loop, and voila. So I'm going to be using this size to put under each loaf as I make it. We'll take one more shot of the parchment paper on our stove for contrast, because white on white doesn't show very well. So this is the half pan size, and this is an 1/8 pan, because that's the size we're going to use under our Italian loaves. I have now added all the flour that's necessary, and I'll explain now that I don't even use flour to roll the dough out, just olive oil. I'm pouring it right on my clean counter, and I will smooth it out on the counter and oil my hands too, because it really helps to handle this dough. So removing the dough from the bowl all in one. And see how sticky it is, but the oil controls that stickiness. I can still handle it beautifully. And this part goes very quickly. So we're guessing. You could weigh this out if you wanted complete accuracy, but all I want is about 6 loaves of bread. So I'm going to divide it just by eye. Again, it doesn't really matter if they're all exactly the same size. You just want approximately a blob big enough to turn into a small loaf. Why I like it this size is because it cooks more evenly. And now what I'm doing is just tucking and smoothing into a little dough ball. And then as soon as it's smooth, I like to shape it so that it's slightly elongated, and I put it on its parchment paper pan. Then go on to the next loaf, turn it out. This goes very quickly. I'm remembering to talk about what I'm doing, but when you're in the middle of doing a large dinner and you're adding this as the side bread, it goes very quickly. not even thinking about it. We have been timing our whole filming, and so far, even taking a half an hour off for letting this first rise happen. It's only been 16 minutes. Almost done. And again, it doesn't matter if these are all the same size. After the dough is formed, I will put it on our warm oven because it is going to be a perfect environment for this last little rise. So I'll just line up my little loaves of bread. They're very easy to move around on their little parchment sheets. And I will see you back here in a half an hour. As I was forming the loaves, I slashed each one just by drawing a knife across. There are fancy instruments that you can use for slashing, but really just a sharp knife will do. We're going to bake these in a 425 degree oven for 12 to 15 minutes. Plan on it being 15, but peek in on it at 12 because sometimes the outer crust goes from just right to too dark. But you'll know the interior is cooked thoroughly if it's 425 for at least 12 minutes. Remember that every time you open a hot oven, remember this is 425 degrees. Do not put your head in the way of the blast. Come from the side and open it this way. Inside you'll see that we have this super hot oven that is lined with a regular floor tile that's glazed on one side and unglazed on the other. We use the unglazed side. You can see we've used it for many years. This used to be tan. But this works as well, if not better, than a pizza stone because you can put more things on it. It almost fits the whole oven. And it's been heating for a while, so it is a good hot pizza stone. I use this little device I'll show you after I place the first one. That kind of looks like a bench scraper. I don't know what it's originally for, but I use it like a pizza peel because you can avoid collisions in there. And I'm using the parchment paper on top of the tile just to keep it easy to manipulate. I'll show you at the very last ones, I may have to scoot it around a little bit and I can reach right in there and scoot as long as the parchment is there. It works like a little slide. So I'll slide these babies in and notice that this tile, our pizza tile, will hold 6 little of these small loaves of bread. See you in 15 minutes. A good habit to get into, and I'm trying to teach myself to do this, is when you open an oven, don't have your head near where there's a blast of hot air that comes out. Just open it from the side and then you're good to go. Turn off your timer. Again, these little pieces of parchment paper help me maneuver my now completed baking. And I have a large wire rack that I use to handle my large loaves.
Okay.
bread is cool enough to slice now. And if you're taking fresh bread to slice it like this is, a wonderful trick is to use an electric knife because it cuts right through. Watch this. Look at the nice even crumb on the inside of the loaf. It's thoroughly cooked. There's no dough. This is the very center slice, and it's perfect slice of Italian bread. I, of course, have to try the ultimate. This bread is good enough that very often I notice my grandchildren don't even bother to butter it. They're consuming it as quickly as they can. Delicious and very convenient and quick to make. I made a 4 times batch of the regular basic Italian bread in my mixer because that's the largest amount I can make. And with 3 of those batches, I divided them in half, so in a few minutes I'll be pulling 6 loaves out of the oven. For my 4th loaf, I thought I would illustrate to you how easy it is to take the same dough and make them into hamburger buns. And I also did a few breadsticks. You can make pizza dough, you can make focaccia. So this is a very versatile dough that you can use pretty much any way you'd like to. I have not tried cinnamon rolls. It probably would work for that. So on a busy day, you could make if you have a large Bosch mixing bowl, you could make a quadruple batch and then make a variety of things for the whole week. I didn't know this for the first few years I was using this recipe, but it freezes very well. The baked goods they taste fresh if you've put them in the freezer when they were freshly baked and cooled. When you pull them out, you cannot tell the difference. I was of the opinion at first that it had to be freshly baked or it was no good. And one day I was having lunch at my daughter-in-law Heather's, and I said, "Heather, how did you have time to make bread this morning?" And she smiled and said, "I pulled it straight from the freezer." So it was definitely a double-blind test. I had no idea that I was wrong about the fresh bread. Be sure and make sure the bread is fully cooled before you put it in the freezer, or you'll get ice crystals.